Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I've got a great guest for you this week. I know I say that every week, but I really do mean it this time. With me today for her second appearance on the program is my friend and former colleague at the Washington Examiner, Tiana Lowe. Tiana, thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, Brad. It is always good to see you.
Yeah, I know. We've started seeing each other in person again. DC's not a total lockdown nightmare anymore.
And I think that's necessary for our sanity.
Yeah.
Because I think, like everyone else, I was close to losing it before, the vaccines hit.
Yeah, and you're right in the heart of the city, so you had it worse than me out in Virginia for sure. But the thing I want to talk about today is something you've been writing on a lot lately. Is there's been a kind of renewed focus and emphasis on Monica Lewinsky's story, right, in the Bill Clinton impeachment, which feels like ages ago, but it's relevant again. There's a new let's see. It's a new TV series that's out. Can you tell us about that?
So Ryan Murphy, who's most famous for creating Glee,
Oh,
he
I love
also
Glee.
same. So he also is the executive producer and creator of American Crime Series or American Crime Story, which is an anthology series that the first season was very famous for recreating the O.J. Simpson murder trial. The second season was about the murder of Gianni Versace, and this season it is about the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And it's really notable because Monica Lewinsky has only ever participated in one previous documentary about that whole saga, the Starr Report, the impeachment. And this one is a fictionalization that she pretty much signed off on in terms of every element, in terms of the casting, the dialogue, what was included or excluded. It's the first time that the world is really seeing how she interpreted the events at the time. And also just given the high profile casting, it's attracted obviously a lot of discussion, and a lot of people who were involved firsthand are still major public figures, politicians, journalists, pundits today.
Yeah, and it has aged poorly, the whole saga, given the Me Too movement and given what some of the people now involved, like Hillary Clinton herself, now have to say about believing all women and everything. But just for listeners who, like, for example, I was, I don't know if I was even born when this happened or just very, very young, but like, walk us through exactly, just in the broadest of strokes, what was the original scandal?
So the Clintons came in to the White House after obviously over a decade of Republican dominance, not just of the presidency, but also of congressional control. And they attracted a lot of scrutiny because Bill Clinton was the first boomer to ever occupy the White House. He and Hillary were seen as much more casual. One of the things that even motivated Linda Tripp to turn on the Clintons, and we'll get into Linda Tripp in a second, was the idea that, the Clintons would host pizza parties in the West Wing. And Hillary didn't make herself, she dove into the politics of the White House. She was the person who basically tried to pass the progenitor of what later became Obamacare. So Bill Clinton also already had a pretty checkered reputation when it came to women. Before he was elected to the presidency, Jennifer Flowers alleged that she and Clinton had held an affair for years. And Hillary very famously said, "I'm not just standing by my man because I think he's a cheat. Like, I'm giving him a pass for whatever." And so feminists really rallied around Clinton. He was seen as one of the most vocal defenders of things that third wave feminists really cared about, like abortion, like women in the workplace. And so on the heels of that, given all that background, he was very much a culturally liberal figure. In the background of his presidency, he began carrying out this affair with Monica Lewinsky, then a 21-year-old intern at the White House, unpaid, when the affair or when the flirtation started. And it carried on for 2 years. It was, yeah. And people at the time, when it first came out, Clinton's defenders would always try and make it seem like she was just escorted in and out to like give a quickie, for lack of a better term. But no, this is someone who they exchanged dozens of gifts over the course of 2 years. She became a very close confidant of Clinton, and people in his inner circle knew about this. And so that is what we're reckoning with, the idea of the most powerful man on the planet carried an affair for 2 years, the woman young enough to be his daughter, and everyone slut-shamed the woman in question. No one asked, oh, is the real, I mean, not to delve into, a left-wing frame of it, no one at the time really considered that Lewinsky was the biggest victim in all of this, not just by Bill Clinton, not just by all of his handlers who made sure to silence her, make her sound like she was a crazy person, but also just by the media. They were really out for blood with her. And this is probably the biggest reckoning that third wave feminism has had ever, especially in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and this interests me because he was ultimately impeached for perjury, right? Because he lied about the affair. And that was like the big scandal, not the thing itself. But in hindsight, when we're looking back at it, not to say that nobody cares about the perjury. I guess people still do, though not so much, really. We're used to politicians lying to us. But the real thing is like the retrospective of, was this even consensual? Can it even, it was definitely an abuse of power. It was definitely sexual harassment, though it wasn't really perceived as such. It was like Bill messing around at the time. But it's like, talk us through this, because neither you or I are left-wing feminists, but there's something to the idea that the president of the United States can't have a consensual relationship with an intern. The power imbalance there is so extreme. I mean, how does that look in hindsight with kind of 2021 social mores and values?
Well, there's definitely a direct line between Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, and not just because they were both friendly with each other, friendly with Jeffrey Epstein, and, a part of that very elite Manhattan circle. It is that as Gloria Steinem, so arguably the most famous third wave feminist alive, as she put it at the time, as long as Bill Clinton was an ardent defender of the sacred calf of the left, then abortion, Bill Clinton would get one free grope. His reputation preceded him. There was obviously already the case of Kathleen Willey, the case of Paula Jones, and then later we discover, I think the most horrifying of all of them is the rape alleged by Juanita Broderick. But Monica Lewinsky was the one who she had the dress with the semen. She had the tapes that Linda Tripp had recorded and Lewinsky did not know about. She is not someone who ever wanted to come forward. And yet she was destroyed for eventually trying to comply with the feds. So basically, Lewinsky tried to protect Clinton. After the whole Whitewater scandal, when the special counsel was appointed and Ken Starr and his quote-unquote elves were looking for how to get him, Clinton was still carrying on the affair with Lewinsky. And she thought she was being discreet, not telling many people about it. But then, one of the infamous people she told about it was Linda Tripp, who was also exiled to the Pentagon with her. They both had come from the West Wing and then wound up working in the Pentagon for different reasons. But for Lewinsky, it was because the senior White House staff, they were worried that she would cause a scandal precisely because of the affair. And so basically, Linda Tripp turned Lewinsky over to the FBI, and it was a operation that was codenamed Prom Night, where basically Linda Tripp goaded her to the Pentagon City Mall, and she was intercepted by a bunch of FBI agents who kept her in custody for over 12 hours, trying to convince her that because she had lied under oath about not having a sexual relationship with Bill Clinton, that she could potentially go to jail for many years. That was the threat. That's the only reason why Lewinsky wound up confessing about her sexual relationship with the president because she was worried that she was going to go to jail. They were threatening her with prison time. And then Clinton World's response was just slut shame her. This is also in like the pre-Kardashian era. The aesthetic of the time was Kate Moss's heroin chic. So what did they do? They made it seem like Lewinsky, who was maybe a size 8 on a bad day, was some sort of obese cow. Hillary Clinton called her a narcissistic Looney Tune. They eviscerated her in every way. She was both too slutty and also too sexually unalluring to have warranted the interest of the president. She was too stupid next to Hillary, who was Ivy League educated. It was very much every toxic sexist trait that we really combed through during the whole Me Too reckoning. That probably came to a peak during the Clinton era.
And tell us more about, you mentioned Hillary Clinton briefly, but I'm really interested in that. Like, what was her public response and attitude and message on all this at the time? Because she has become such a woke Me Too feminist, right? Believe all women, against Brett Kavanaugh, all of this. And it was always this glaring issue, but how did she handle it at the time? What was her messaging like in her public statements?
So Hillary tried to take the silent tact, and obviously I'm not going to fault someone for what they do purely in their personal lives when it's that messy. But the way that she let all of her allies, really, again, for lack of a better term, slut shame Lewinsky, really just do she's dumb, she's young, she's fat, and she was the one who was the aggressor. That was really the message at the time. And then at the same time that the Lewinsky story came forward, that was when NBC News then was trying to nail the Juanita Broaddrick story. And Juanita Broaddrick has alleged, and again, this allegation goes back to contemporaneous corroboration, back to the 70s, when Bill was still the state attorney general of Arkansas. She says that Hillary, after the rape at another donor event, came up to her and shook her hand in a menacing way, said, thank you for everything you do for Bill, alluding to the fact that she had not come forward to the police about the rape. So Hillary has always relied on people to do her bidding. I think this was best seen in what happened with Harvey Weinstein in Ronan Farrow's reporting. Ronan Farrow was trying to talk to Hillary's people about her association with Weinstein. And basically, in response to his reporting before he even contacted any of the Clinton folks about Weinstein, they withdrew an interview for his book about diplomacy. Ronan Farrow had nabbed down every living Secretary of State for his book War on Peace. And after Clinton, who had employed Ronan Farrow at the State Department, she withdrew the interview offer, citing a packed schedule when he was hunting down Weinstein. And I'm not saying that Hillary probably knew the nitty-gritty about what Weinstein was doing behind closed doors, but he was a very prolific donor to Clinton Inc. And there was clearly some retaliation there for threatening the fundraising machine.
Wow. I didn't know that story. I can't say it's particularly surprising with what we know about Hillary and how she's handled these things over the years, but tell us more about American Crime Story. So this is the first time we've seen this story really from Lewinsky's full perspective. What's different than the traditional narrative?
So the interesting thing is, Beanie Feldstein, who portrays Monica, is she's going to revive the role of Fanny Bryce in Funny Girl, the infamous Barbara Streisand role. She is wildly talented. So any criticism that anyone has of her is not about Feldstein's acting choices, but rather, the producer's interpretation of the events. And the thing that was always that has been very interesting to me in watching this is that it almost seems like Monica, the real life Monica Lewinsky, is almost underselling herself because she has interpreted the media's version of events. the real life Monica at the time, as Jake Tapper has written about, because he went on actually a date with her very shortly before the whole impeachment saga unfolded. He said, she had this sort of an interesting like dressing style that you don't see in DC, because as you and I both know, it's just ill-fitting Brooks Brothers and stuff that you get off the rack at Macy's. Like she had a sense of style. She had a personality and actually would eat food and not just salad on a date. And she was charming and she was attractive. And like, this was not the aughts where you have 8 billion photos to choose from for a news story. She had, 2 photos of her that were shared for all the media coverage, and they're probably the least flattering pictures that you could find of her. So I think a lot of the way that the story in American Crime Story is told is not as flattering to her as it should be, because she is probably overly humble at this point after years of being told, you're this fat, dumb slut. Of course you internalize that. It's shockingly sympathetic to Linda Tripp, who was a very close friend of Lewinsky's, who sort of revolved her life around, betraying her. It's shockingly kind to Hillary by very minimally portraying her, and it doesn't portray Chelsea Clinton on screen at all, which I think is a very graceful decision. And from like a right-wing perspective, it's very interesting how right-wing media, they have Matt Drudge, George Conway, Ann Coulter, played by Kobe Smulders of How I Met Your Mother. They aren't portrayed just as one-dimensional villains as one would expect from a Hollywood production. And Ann Coulter in particular does point out, sort of cheekily, in what is clearly an allusion to Donald Trump, if we don't get this guy impeached, think about the next, pudgy con man who's going to take over office. And we did see what happened. When Democrats decided to give Bill Clinton a pass, it gave Republicans, get out of jail free card to insert someone like Donald Trump into the White House.
Yeah, I mean, the line you said earlier about one free grope really stuck with me, because, I mean, I guess it's not that far a leap from our guy gets one free grope to our guy gets to brag about groping on camera and we'll just look the other way. So it is interesting how so much of our politics, like Democrats versus Republicans, whether it's getting rid of the filibuster or whatever, it's like a series of escalations between the two where they end up really undercutting their own position in the long term with short-term, compromises, basically. And so that's a really interesting thing to me. But I do wonder, right, how has because this series, this just came out, how has it been received? Has it prompted like introspection, backlash, or how has it been broadly received, this American Crime Story take on the whole Monica Lewinsky Clinton saga?
So I hoped that it would be received as a pass for people to reconsider how they addressed, this when it initially happened. I mean, even Monica, for years, she was a contributing editor to Vanity Fair in 2014, where she didn't defend Clinton, but she did try and reassert, the relationship was consensual. And only after the whole Me Too reckoning did she admit, the power dynamics made it way more questionable than she thought of it at the time. But the most shocking response to it that I've seen was on The View. So Joy Behar was already on television, when this was going on at the time. And she has never apologized for how she's portrayed these events. And she, once again, even 2021, Hillary Clinton does not have a political future. Donald Trump is gone. There was zero political incentive to minimize how bad this was. Joy Behar comes forward and says, the real victims were Hillary Clinton and America. Not America for having someone disgrace the Oval Office like that, but America because we lost out on Hillary Clinton in 2016. So,
wow.
Yeah. So there is boomer feminism. I mean, you and I are both libertarians, but I also kind of think that boomer feminism should be punishable, by death or by being sent to Gitmo. It's just that toxic at this point.
No, obviously you're joking, but it's funny to me that, how could you possibly get away with saying that, even as a liberal icon like Joy Behar, right, who's on this liberal talk show? I mean, can you just imagine if, I don't know, Fox News host said that in inverse, like the outrage cycle that would ensue? Did anybody at least like push back on the other panelists, or like, has she gotten backlash for this, or do they all just nod along because it's like a Democrat Party thing?
I mean, it's an echo chamber, right? This is ABC News that you have an entire hot mic or I guess it was a hot mic that James O'Keefe found of Amy Robach admitting that they shut down reporting into Prince Andrew's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein's alleged, child sex victims, because they wanted to maintain good relations with the palace. So I don't hold them to the highest regard in terms of their ethical bar. But there was never going to be a real reckoning because, they bullied Meghan McCain out of there. I don't think she left in terms of fleeing, but she has like a baby and a husband. Why would she want to be around that toxic disaster? They're right now trying to interview all of their prospective conservative hosts. And it's like, they either want someone they can make cry and humiliate, or someone who isn't going to stand for that sort of stuff. So defending Monica Lewinsky? Hell no. Of course it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and it's kind of a shame because it'd be interesting if they actually had strong voices on there and diversity. Yeah. But instead, it's unwatchable. I used to watch a lot of clips of it when I was at the Examiner because they would give us great content, right, to write about.
They would.
But now it's like, oh gosh, I just can't. I also don't know. There's apparently still millions of people that watch daytime television on the television, and I'm like, I don't even have that. Like, I couldn't even just turn on TV and watch The View. Like, I'd have to watch it on YouTube or something, or try to stream it somehow. But I do wonder this, right? Because this stuff is not occurring in a vacuum. And do you think this is just kind of part and parcel of a broader trend in terms of Me Too hypocrisy on the left and with Democrats? Because I think of other things too. I mean, I think of the number of, they've been sometimes consistent. Like you think of, what's his name? The Minnesota Senator Al Franken, who had to resign after he had photographs of him like pretending to grab a woman's breasts while she was asleep, or other things.
Oh, he wasn't pretending.
Oh, was he actually doing it?
No, he was actually doing it. And like, in the jurisdiction, it constituted criminal battery if she had wanted to press forward with like charges.
But he actually had to resign as a Democrat. Now, some people have tried to whitewash him and bring him back, but at least they did push him to resign. There have been other cases, though, where it seems like they've just gotten away with it. I remember there was an accusation against Biden during the campaign, and they just all, ripped up that whole Believe Women playbook. How do you perceive the left, broadly speaking, as having been hypocritical on some of this stuff? And if so, what pops out to you as examples?
So it's pretty unfortunate because it seems pretty clear that the Me Too movement was increasingly, it seems, like a moment. Like, it did not last, in the sense that, I know you and I both covered a lot the Kavanaugh confirmations, and I wrote about this in Politico magazine, by no means, a right-wing publication. But one of the things I highlighted was need to emphasize that there was a consistent standard of what warrants cancellation, for lack of a better term. We all understand that, being tried in a criminal court should have a higher burden of proof than what gets you colloquially canceled, or what gets a bunch of senators to not confirm you to the Supreme Court. And I think reasonable people can disagree with what that is, but we all agree there should be a consistent standard. For me, I think the preponderance of evidence is a fairly consistent, good, common sense standard. But the senators who were voting for him, you have Mazie Hirono coming out saying, I'm evaluating him in the context of what he's ruled. And what that says is that he doesn't respect women, which is pretty clearly just politically blackballing someone, attributing guilt without actually evidence. And that to me felt like, oh no. And I was someone I was in Los Angeles at the beginning of Me Too. I have interviewed Rose McGowan. I was doing direct reporting on the Weinstein stuff when it broke. and LA is a D+20 town, so it wasn't like I was talking to a bunch of conservatives. I was talking to people who rightly were like, all right, if Donald Trump is president and Hillary Clinton is done, let's correctly have a realignment. And Kavanaugh felt like the beginning of the end, because it was so obvious that people were using the same Clintonian arguments of, well, if he isn't going to protect abortion, then why are we going to pretend like he's innocent? And that just continued. Roy Moore, if he were a candidate in 2021, I'm very scared that people would have been like, screw it, fine, we'll vote him in. Moore and Franken were in that very limited liminal space in which both parties had to take things like sexual misconduct very seriously. With the Biden thing, so Tara Reade, her claim is very odd for a number of reasons. One, she did contemporaneously tell people about it, which is very uncommon in false claims. But also, though, there was no one else who made a claim against Biden. In part, could that be because other potential accusers saw how Tara Reade was treated by the media? I would reckon so. And the fact of how political these things become is just reflected in the difference between how Biden's accusers in 2019 who are alleging he sniffed their hair or, he rubbed their shoulders were treated with the utmost seriousness by the media versus Tara Reade alleging a penetrative criminal assault in 2020 when he was the only thing standing between Trump's second term.
They were all like fake news, Russian disinformation.
Yeah, and it was broken by The Intercept.
Believe women went out the window.
Yeah, are Katie Halper and Ryan Grimm agents of the Russian government? Are they Trump supporters? I don't think so. And I'm not saying that, again, my bar has always been preponderance of evidence. I don't think Tara Reade has met that yet. But, we didn't actually get a correct media investigation because they immediately went to, Politico was reporting on how poor she was and that she conned, people out of rent because she was too broke to pay it. So
So they haven't learned their lesson is what I'm hearing. Nobody's learned their lesson.
No, it is gearing us up for Donald Trump 2.0, Bill Clinton 2.0, or Hillary Clinton 2.0, whatever you decide it is. And it's really tragic.
Yeah, is character in elected officials just dead as an expectation or a requirement?
So it shouldn't be, but I think we've seen pretty clearly we are hurtling towards, whatever lines we can continue to cross. You have the flagrant anti-Israel anti-Semitism of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. You have Jewish space lasers from Marjorie Taylor Greene. You have, the Great Replacement theory from the alt-right. You have, it's not abating on either end, what people think they can get away with. I used to think of myself as much more of a libertine in terms of politics, just because I generally don't care what people do consensually in their own homes. And weirdly, I've now felt myself feeling a little moralistic in the sense things like, fidelity to your spouse, if that's the terms you agreed upon, that should factor into how I vote. That's something I care about because that's also fidelity to your voters, fidelity to your children. Basic things like living by the rules that you set, as we've seen in, DC, mayors violating mask mandates. Also, that spurred an entire recall election in California. But it has to be bipartisan, not in terms of top-down party control, but just in terms of principle, not just trying to pin it on, oh, look what the other guy did, but maybe if we go back on Earth 2, and instead of Barack Obama bullying Joe Biden out of running back in 2016, he says, Hillary, that's enough. You can go back to Chappaqua with your hidden email server in violation of federal law, and maybe we run Joe Biden, and maybe we get Hunter into rehab, where he's not trying to get money from, Lebanon and China. But
that's an alternate reality. Maybe we'd all be better off. But if they, I, I just had the thought if they'd gone with Jeb instead of Trump, and I'm like, there's so many possibilities there that could have been much better and much worse. Probably more memeable slogans, but fewer funny moments and tweets. But we could go down that rabbit hole all day. But I think we'll have to do that another time. Tiana Lowe, commentary writer, WashingtonExaminer.com. Everybody, Tiana, before I let you go, do you have a second food take to throw out for the audience?
Oh, a food take. Oh my gosh. I can't remember if I said this last time. Every recipe that entails onions, you can replace onions for garlic and it will improve the recipe. Unless if it calls for shallots, because shallots are such a specific taste.
What about Philly cheesesteak?
I'm not really a cheesesteak person. Oh. I mean, I'm not really a meat person. Like, I love sushi. I love the occasional good filet mignon. But much to my boyfriend's dismay.
I'm like, give me some fried chicken.
But I only really need. Weirdly enough, I did one of those carbon quizzes, about how eco-friendly is your lifestyle. Apparently, mine is very because I walk pretty much everywhere and I just don't eat that much meat, and I live in a studio, which probably means I'm living the life of a totally miserable leftist lib. But the good thing, I guess, is that not needing to eat that much meat makes my groceries a little cheaper. But yeah, no, I would say garlic instead of onions. Unless if the recipe calls for shallots. That's probably my most specific food take.
Very specific. Interesting. Well, we'll have to see what people think of that. Tiana, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you, Brad.